Like all of us, video game developers make mistakes every now and then, and these mistakes often take the form in game mechanics that are either poorly thought out, poorly implemented, overused, or a deadly combination of all three. This is a feature about 15 video game mechanics that have, over the years, for one reason or the other, gotten on our nerves. So, without further ado, let's get started. QTEs. QuickTime events can be a great tool when executed properly. The Greek-era God of War games, for instance, used them to great effect to punctuate high-octane sequences in a great blend of cinematic and gameplay. The problem is, games that do that are very rare. QTEs more often than not feel unnecessary and arbitrary, and for every God of War, we have a dozen games that fall on the other end of that spectrum. Rubber banding. We all appreciate good AI in racing games to actually give us a challenge, but the vast majority of games in the genre tend to resort to rubber banding techniques. You might be miles ahead of your opponents, and they might still close the gap on you in no time at all in the name of artificial difficulty. Even great games like Mario Kart fall back on rubber banding a bit too much. Bullet sponges. Bullet sponges aren't always bad. For instance, they're pretty much a necessity in looters where DPS is an integral mechanic of the core gameplay. But when bullet sponge enemies are used to ramp up the difficulty, they can be a huge annoyance. Because that's not real difficulty, is it? You're not actually being challenged to contend with dangerous attacks or read unpredictable movement patterns. You just have to deal with a large health bar. And at that point, it becomes a battle of attrition and not skill. Level scaling. Level scaling is perhaps one of the most pointless and infuriating mechanics an RPG can employ, because it seems to be antithetical to what an RPG is supposed to be. As you level up and become more powerful, you're supposed to feel more powerful, so that when you go into earlier areas of the game, you can stomp on what had once been daunting enemies with ease. That's what progression is all about, to make you feel like you're growing stronger. But if all of your enemies are leveling up alongside you, what's even the point of leveling up? Just to watch the numbers go up? Invisible walls. To be fair, this is more a design constraint than a gameplay mechanic, and is far less common now thanks to powerful hardware. Games have to deal with fewer design constraints. That said, there's not a single person who hasn't been disappointed to run into an invisible wall in a game at one point in their life. It breaks the immersion. Rather than letting us run into a wall of invisible air, why not just let us fall off the edge and die? Fetch quests. The scourge of the open-world games that is, curiously enough, found in every open-world game in existence. We all demand a deluge of content in games that go along with the open-world approach, and more often than not, developers deliver that content in the form of meaningless fetch quests. Go pick up that diary, collect 99 feathers scattered throughout the map, go bring me 10 herbs so that I can cook this dish. Unless they're properly contextualized and actually involve some enjoyable mechanics, fetch quests represent some of the worst tendencies of open-world games. Overly hand-holdy tutorials. Until not too long ago, The Legend of Zelda as a series had become one of the worst offenders of this. None of us mind tutorials, in many cases they're even necessary, but every so often a game comes along that feels the need to tutorialize everything, no matter how trivial. Worse still are the games that do it in excruciating detail and then ask us if we got all of that. Out of mission area. Like invisible walls, players being told to stay within a mission area is more of a design constraint than anything else, and not something that we see too often in games anymore. But this, too, is an immersion breaker. Being told to stay within an arbitrary decided chunk of the map isn't what any of us are looking for in any game, especially if that game otherwise provides a large open playing field for players to mess about in. Having to restart the entire mission from the beginning. One name that immediately comes to mind here is the older Grand Theft Auto games, though there are, of course, many other games that do this as well. But it seems ridiculous to think that many times missions don't come with checkpoints, and that if you fail them for whatever reason, you have to do them from the very beginning. If the game in question also has unskippable cutscenes, this becomes doubly annoying. Speaking of cutscenes. Unpausable cutscenes. This is an issue that has become more prevalent as games have become more accomplished as a storytelling medium. Longer cutscenes are more commonly found in games than they were about 2 decades ago, and not having the ability to pause the game during these cutscenes can be pretty annoying. Want to get a bite to eat or check your phone while one of these cutscenes is playing? Well, tough luck. Even worse are the cutscenes that immediately skip as soon as you press the pause button, so even testing to see if the cutscenes can be paused becomes a gamble in and of itself. Encumbrance. We understand why encumbrance is a thing in so many games. We're not doubting its logic, but that doesn't mean that we can't hate it. If by chance you become over-encumbered in, say, The Witcher 3 and can't find anything in your inventory that you can dispose of, that immediately puts you at a disadvantage. You move at a snail's pace, and you can't even fast travel. So what do you do then? Rifle through your whole inventory to find something disposable? Or, eat all of those cheese wheels that you have? Timed missions. When used properly, timed missions can be a great way to inject tension into games, and there's plenty of games that have done just that. But there's also an equal number of games that have failed to do so. Contending with weird design choices or poor controls in such anxiety-inducing situations is usually the opposite of fun, and when these time limits are too restrictive or arbitrary, the not fun factor becomes even more exacerbated. UBISOFT Towers. UBISOFT Towers by themselves are by no means a bad video game mechanic. In fact, when used properly, like in Breath of the Wild, they can actually be pretty great. But being used excessively, and not always in the best manner, has left a bad taste in all of our mouths. Their overstructured and mechanical nature seems like it misses the point of complete freedom in open-world games, while what follows, a wave of icons vomited all over the map, more often than not leading to meaningless and repetitive collectathons and fetch quests, is not a lot of fun either. Escort missions. Escort missions being annoying is one thing we can all agree on as a community. With some very notable exceptions, like all of Eco basically, escort missions are some of the most annoying things developers can put in a game. Having to worry about the safety of another character on top of having to worry about yourself feels like a chore, and even worse are situations where that character insists on being stupid, useless, or even both. Forced slow walking. Slow walking is often used to great cinematic effect in games, but that's an exception to the rule, and the rule is forced walking is annoying. It is literally a pace killer. Even worse are situations where you can walk and run at whatever pace you want, but have to follow a character that is moving at a pace faster than you walk, but slower than you sprint. And those NPCs are terrible and thoughtless human beings. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.